So, hi everybody, this is Jeffrey Gillespie, the sales director at New Art Gallery. We're very excited to be here with the wonderful and preeminent artist Randall Reid, who we love and who's part of our permanent group of artists here at the gallery. And we're going to do a little Q&A. Randall's originally from San Marcos, he's originally from Fort Worth.
Fort Worth.
And now living in San Marcos, Texas. He's shown globally in places as far afield as Chile and Kuwait City, and has been in more than 300 shows. And we'd like to think that this is the pinnacle of that entire creative process. We're looking at a wonderful group of paintings which you'll be able to see in gallery or online, but I would encourage you to look at either way. They're absolutely exquisite. You're seeing a few of them here behind us. And so I'm just going to start with a quote of Randall's, and then we'll move into some questions, and we'll see how we do. This show is called Hidden Material. And the quote from Randall is, "As life reflects us back to ourselves as a means to discovery, I hope that my work mirrors the spirit of the viewer at the same time that it addresses my own philosophical concerns." And I'd like to start, Randall, with a question on that. When you refer to the philosophical concerns in the quote, what specifically are you exploring in your work?
Well, thank you, Jeffrey. I'm really exploring the idea of aging, whether it's the process of aging as a civilization, or it's a process of aging as individuals, as humankind. And not only the process of aging as civilization, but materials that people have collected over time. And some of the materials I'm referring to are materials that I was actually using in my artwork. And I like to think of kind of going back into time and thinking about, if I'm hunting and gathering for certain materials, like where did it instigate? Why was the original material created? For what purpose? And who bought the material originally? And what did they use it for? And over time, did their thinking, appreciation of the material change? Their perception of the material? Through really the aging process of the natural forces of the earth. Then I would consider, like, how was it that I found the material? Was it passed on generation to generation? Was it eventually sold? Was it in a garage sale? Was it in a flea market? And then how did I actually connect to that material? Was it fate? Was it chance and randomness? And eventually I did locate that material. I did find it. And so I used that material in my artwork, and I've sort of intercepted the path of that material and created a new beginning point for history. Because now it's an art piece, an art form, and that form can then be transferred to another person and start a new life.
Right. That's very interesting. So, was it a sense that the material found you, or that you found the material? Was it a combination?
I think it's kind of a combination of things. Like sometimes I'll be exiting a place and say, okay, I think we've looked far enough in that place, and then I think I saw something that I really like here. I'm going to drive back to that place and pick it up. It's calling to me. So I think it's kind of a duality of thinking there.
Interesting. And you're often remixing and recontextualizing found and historic materials. And you've spoken a little bit about that, but what led you sort of down the path of finding these salvage materials? Was there something early on? What kind of triggered that response in you creatively?
Well, I think just as a young boy, a young man, I just collected the things that most kids kind of collect, like coins or stamps or maybe some football cards or something like that. Then later on I began to, expand that into some found objects. It's something I might find by just liking it by the color of the patina, or like the texture or the form of it. And then later on I began to kind of, even in undergraduate school, I began to use material in some of my artwork. Instead of like painting from life, I would paint or draw more non-objectively, so I might even incorporate a drop cloth that my dad was staining chairs with, and create sort of an abstracted landscape of that, or maybe some sand on a tennis court. I could experiment with a new texture on my paintings. Then in graduate school, I started thinking about making some standalone three-dimensional objects. And so I found a lot of wood, and I cut that into little strips and made these sort of large boat-like forms. And ever since that, I just kept expanding my collection, and then getting into more vintage material, things that had an age to them. It would take me back in the time of sort of the grandparents or the great-grandparents. And I started being influenced by my own environment. The house was filled with all these vintage materials, so suddenly you kind of are what you are, what you're surrounded by. And so I began to kind of be influenced by the materials and started thinking about, what if I took one of those objects and sort of deconstructed that to an extent and reconstruct that, repurpose that, and make that part of my artwork.
So there's the hunt and then the deconstruction and reconstruction phase, which is sort of reanimating something that may have become perceived to be, or may have actually become useless or kind of obsolete or obtuse in some way. And tell me a little bit about this notoriety piece and finding a home and these pieces of your process.
Well, I think, like you said before, that there's several different stages that kind of motivate me. Just the material itself motivates me incredibly, but it's the hunting and gathering period that's really exciting, to look for materials, to find something to think about where I'm building something from scratch. I'm just seeing something that I respond to and thinking, what can I do with that material? So I'm not really starting with a plan. None of my work starts with a plan. It's just more of a reaction to material. So I sort of deconstructing that, taking it apart. Sometimes I think about what is more exciting, hammering a nail or pulling a nail.
Right.
And so I said that combination of addition and subtraction, of cutting things up, re-looking at it, sort of repurposing it, and then reconfiguring it. And then a lot of the scraps, which I thought was a scrap, become very important. They become a new kind of impetus to create something else, and that leads to something else which continues to lead on basically until there's just sawdust left and little scraps of paper on the floor. I just sweep that up and start again.
So that sort of evaporates into the ether, and then it's an entirely fresh process. Do you consider yourself an abstractionist in that sense?
Well, I consider myself more of sort of non-objective, because I'm really not working from a subject matter, although I can include subject matter or typography. But most of my work is just sort of about just a feeling, a sensation, rather than sort of about a particular thing in itself. It's more abstractly looked at, but it can refer to a landscape. It could refer to an image, and then that begins the sort of memory process that the viewer starts to think about what memories do they associate that with. I just don't think a lot about the future. It's more of the past. While I'm working in my studio, I just tend to think about, well, what was I doing when I was 10 years old or 12 years old or 15 years old? Just to drift off into a different time period.
So that's interesting. So there's sort of a creative impulse towards the past as opposed to the present or the future. Right. And then when the piece is finished, is that final form such as it is that a surprise to you at the end of the process? Do you go, oh, there it is?
I think it is in a way, because I don't really know what it's going to look like. So I really don't have the beginning image of what it's going to look like. I'll start laying out pieces of it. Sometimes I'll have to do a little drawing of it so I can put it back together, or use some little pieces of tape to number where I'm going to put this puzzle back together. But I can't get too far out, otherwise I'll never just too many pieces, because it's got a lot of confluence of many different things have to happen. So I'm generally not deconstructing one item and using that. I'm combining that with several other items. And I've always liked to kind of work from scratch. I'm not a type of person who, I did build a few model kits when I was a kid, but I didn't really enjoy having to put it back the way the directions told you to. I'd like to just put it together any way I wanted to. Same thing with cooking. I like to cook, but I don't like to follow a recipe. So I just like to just improvise, and something needs to happen. It just sort of, somehow I can tap into the kind of spirit, I think, that the material has. And it kind of goes beyond the surface. It's not just something that I was walking around the day thinking that, looking at some of these, I like to go to some of the rock stores here and fossil stores. And if you laid like a buffalo nickel on the table, or a fossil, or a gem that was polished, even if it was a diamond, which one would I grab? I wouldn't grab the diamond. It's just, it'd be that thing that was old, that had a wornness to it, a history, a past to it. That's what I just really gravitate toward. I almost think I was born in a different time. I'm just sort of going back into that time period.
Unearthing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, so the idea of working to any kind of template is far too restrictive a thing for you. You'd much rather just be exploring and letting it letting the materials take you where they want to go.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like just the chance and randomness, like we've said before, of what I find, and that directs the work. It's like.
And the oldest material you used was dated 1796. What was that?
Well, that was the back of a clock face. It was a wood, kind of almost like a house hotel shape, and it even had the name of a clockmaker. And then it was refurbished in 1837, and then refurbished by another clockmaker in the 1930s. It sort of had its own sort of history laid out right before me. It's like what it was, and it's just like I created this really great piece, but I think I'm going to ship it to Newark now.
We appreciate it. So I think that's good. It gives us a kind of a strong, a sort of a strong frame for a lot of what we're seeing here. And I'd like to open up for questions, Jonathan, if we have any. Are you seeing anything there that people are asking that Randall might be able to answer?
Do we have any questions in the audience? We're opening the floor to questions from the audience. I'm not seeing any questions here.
That's good. Then we answered everything there is.
We covered everything well.
Yeah.
Well, it's great. So the show is up. We would love to see you, and we're very happy to.
The opening's tonight.
Yes, of course the opening's tonight. I apologize for that. So we're basically starting now. We'll be here through 7 p.m. and then the show will be up for most of the month.
Through April 3rd.
And we would, yes, April 3. We'd love to see you. It's really worth coming in for, and we thank Randall for taking a seat with us. And now we're going to take him off the air so that we can go and have the opening.
We have one question.
Oh, we do. Okay.
I'm curious. I'm not quite understanding. When do you decide to reverse a piece to show text?
Well, sometimes I use the text more abstractly as a letter form. I mean, as a shape, positive or negative shape. But other times I like to just kind of play with the audience about this particular piece I'm going to glance over. It says glass must be full, and just sort of let the audience sort of think about what that can mean, you know.
Yeah.
And sort of got to that: is the glass half empty or is it half full? You know, I love to work with numbers as well. That's, you know, all through my history, I'm interested in calibrations or how far I could throw a football or measuring distances in space. So just sort of naturally sort of drawn toward that sort of combination of numbers and letter forms. And sometimes they can be very literal or can be very more abstractly interpreted.
Is there any more questions there in the audience? Just wrapping up our Q&A here with Randall Reid. Again, the opening is tonight. Opening reception. Wait, we have one more question. Will Randall's antique objects be on display for the show? Yes, they will. I can answer that one. Yep. The show is featuring all Randall Reid's work. It's a solo show. And it'll be on display, on exhibit, until April 3rd. And the opening is tonight, 5 to 7, and Randall will be present. So if you'd like, you can come by and meet the artist.
Thank you.
He's a jolly lad. If there's any more questions, we will filter one more question. Otherwise, we're going to be signing off here. Thank you for tuning in to New Art Gallery's Q&A with